The park was quieter than it should have been for a weekday afternoon. Not silent, but subdued, like the city had taken a breath and decided not to exhale yet. Mike Tyson noticed that kind of quiet. He always did. It was the kind that made small sounds feel louder than they were. Footsteps on gravel, a distant siren, the rustle of leaves overhead. That was when he saw the old man, sitting alone on a bench near the edge of the walking path, head lowered, shoulders hunched forward, hands pressed to his face. Crying. Not the kind of crying meant to be seen, the kind people try to hide. Mike slowed his pace without realizing it. He could have kept walking. Most people would have. They would have told themselves it wasn't their business, that the man probably wanted privacy, that stopping might make it worse. Mike told himself all of that too for about 2 seconds. Then he stopped. What happened next wasn't dramatic. There were no raised voices, no violence, no crowd gathering around with phones out. But for one old man, and for Mike Tyson himself, that quiet moment would stay with them far longer than either expected. Before we get to that bench, that conversation, and the choice Mike made, take a second to like this video and subscribe if you're here for real stories like this. Stories that don't always make headlines, but remind us what strength actually looks like. Earlier that afternoon, Mike had gone for a walk to clear his head. He did that more often now. Walking helped him think, helped him slow down. The park wasn't far from his hotel, a small stretch of green tucked between busy streets and tall buildings. It wasn't a tourist spot, mostly locals, retirees, dog walkers, people just passing time. Mike wore a dark hoodie, jeans, and a baseball cap pulled low. No one had recognized him yet, and he preferred it that way. Fame was loud. This place wasn't. He walked at an easy pace, hands in his pockets, letting his thoughts drift. Regrets, memories, things he couldn't change, things he was still trying to understand. That was when he noticed the old man again. Late 70s, maybe early 80s, thin, pale. His jacket looked old but carefully kept, like it mattered to him. The man's breathing was uneven. His shoulders shook slightly each time he exhaled. Mike slowed down even more, watching without staring. He told himself he'd pass the bench and circle back if the man still looked upset. But as he got closer, he heard it. A soft, broken sound. A sob that slipped out before the man could stop it. That decided it. Mike changed direction and walked toward the bench. He didn't approach fast. He didn't want to startle him. He stopped a few feet away, far enough to give space. The old man noticed him immediately and stiffened. He wiped his face quickly with the sleeve of his jacket, embarrassed at being seen. "Sorry," the man said, his voice shaky. "I'm fine." Defensive but weak. Mike nodded slowly. "You don't look fine," he said gently. "Mind if I sit for a minute?" The old man hesitated, then shrugged. "If you want." Mike sat down, leaving space between them. The bench creaked slightly under the weight. For a moment, neither spoke. A comfortable silence. The park noises filled the gap. Birds, footsteps, a dog barking somewhere far off. Ambient, peaceful. "Didn't mean to make a scene," the old man said finally. "Just had a moment." Mike kept his eyes forward. "Moments happen," he said simply. The man let out a tired breath. "My wife used to say that feelings don't ask permission." Mike turned his head slightly. "Used to?" The man nodded. Heavy pause. 43 years. She passed last spring." His voice cracked on the last word. He pressed his lips together, trying to keep control. Mike felt something tighten in his chest. Loss did that. It reached across years and experiences and made strangers feel familiar. "I'm sorry," Mike said. The man nodded again. "Today would have been her birthday. I didn't know where else to go." He gestured weakly at the park. "We used to come here, sit on this bench, feed the birds, talk about nothing. Mike listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't rush to fix anything. The old man needed space to let the words out. I thought I was past the worst of it, the man continued. But some days it hits you like it's brand new. Mike nodded, knowing. Grief doesn't move at a straight line, he said. The man glanced at him. You've lost someone. It wasn't a question. Mike exhaled slowly, weighted breath. More than a few, he said. They sat there for several seconds. A pause, shared silence. Two strangers sharing the same quiet weight. The old man wiped his eyes again. Vulnerable. I hate crying in public, he said. Makes me feel weak. Mike shook his head. Crying doesn't make you weak, he said. It means you loved something enough to feel the loss. The man looked at him more closely now, studying his face. Something clicked. You sound familiar, he said. Mike smiled faintly. I get that sometimes. The man squinted. His eyes widened slightly. Wait, he said. Are you Mike Tyson? Mike nodded once. Yeah. The old man stared, then let out a soft laugh that turned into a shaky breath. Didn't expect to meet you like this, he said. Didn't expect to meet anyone like this today, Mike replied. They both smiled briefly, and for the first time since Mike had entered the park, the quiet felt a little lighter. They sat there longer than either of them expected. The old man introduced himself as Harold. He spoke slowly, choosing his words with care, like each sentence mattered. He told Mike about his wife, Eleanor, how she used to hum while she cooked, how she laughed at her own jokes before finishing them, how the house felt too big now, even though it was the same size it had always been. Mike listened without checking the time, without shifting impatiently. He nodded when it felt right. He stayed quiet when silence said more. Harold talked about the day Eleanor passed, about holding her hand in the hospital room, about the way she squeezed his fingers once before letting go. His voice didn't break this time. The tears had already done their damage earlier. These words were steadier, heavier. Mike understood that too. There was a stage of grief where the pain stopped spilling out and started sinking in instead. Harold glanced at Mike and smiled faintly. Funny thing, he said. I spent most of my life thinking strength meant not letting anyone see you struggle. Mike leaned back slightly. A lot of people think that, he said. It took me a long time to learn otherwise. Harold looked at him with curiosity. You? Mike nodded, firm. Especially me. That earned a quiet chuckle. They talked about age, about how time speeds up when you're not paying attention, about how the world keeps moving even when your own feels like it's standing still. Harold admitted he'd almost stayed home that day, that he'd stood in his doorway with his coat on, unsure if he had the energy to go out. I'm glad you did, Mike said. Harold nodded. Me too, even if I didn't think that an hour ago. A couple passed by with a dog. The dog stopped briefly, tail wagging, then moved on. The park continued around them, unaware of the small moment unfolding on a weathered bench. After a while, Harold sighed and pushed himself up slowly. I should head back, he said. Eleanor always hated when I stayed out too late. Mike stood as well. Want some company? He asked. Harold hesitated, then nodded. I wouldn't mind that. They walked side by side along the path, matching Harold's slower pace. No rush, just steps and conversation. As they walked, Harold asked Mike if he ever missed boxing. Mike thought about it before answering. I miss who I thought it made me, he said, not always who it actually did. Harold considered that. Sounds familiar, he said. A few minutes later, they reached the park exit. Cars moved past. The noise of the city crept back in. Harold stopped and turned to Mike. Thank you, he said, for sitting with me, for listening. Mike nodded. "You didn't have to go through that moment alone," he said. "Nobody should if they don't have to." Harold smiled, this time without tears. "I think Eleanor would have liked you," he said. Mike smiled back. "I'd like to think so." They shook hands. Harold's grip was weak but sincere. Then he turned and walked toward his apartment building across the street. Mike watched until he was safely inside. Later that evening, Mike found himself thinking about that bench, about how close he'd been to walking past it, how easy it would have been to mind his own business. Most people would have, and he didn't blame them. Life trained you to keep moving, to avoid getting involved, to protect your own peace. But sometimes, peace came from doing the opposite. That night, Mike called someone he hadn't spoken to in a while. The conversation was short, awkward at first, then real. He didn't mention Harold. He didn't mention the park. But something from that afternoon stayed with him, a reminder that presence mattered more than answers. Days later, Harold told his daughter about what happened, about the bench, about the stranger who sat down and didn't rush him, about realizing strength could look like stillness. She listened quietly, then smiled. "Dad," she said, "that's exactly what Mom would have wanted." And somewhere in the city, life went on. No headlines, no viral clips, just one less lonely afternoon. If you've ever felt like you had to hide your pain, if you've ever cried where no one could see, remember this. Strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just choosing to stop. If this story meant something to you, take a moment to like the video. It helps more than you think. And if you want more stories like this, subscribe and stay with us. We'll keep telling them, because moments like these deserve to be remembered. Mike didn't talk about that afternoon in interviews. He didn't tell friends about it in detail. It wasn't a story he felt the need to repeat. Some moments weren't meant to be retold over and over. They were meant to sit quietly inside you, changing the way you moved through the world without announcing themselves. But every so often, when Mike walked through a park or past an old couple holding hands, he thought about Harold, about the bench, about how close he'd come to walking past. It reminded him that life rarely announces its important moments ahead of time. They show up unmarked, ordinary, easy to miss, and the choice is almost always simple: stop or keep going. For Harold, that day became something he carried with him, not as a dramatic rescue or a story about meeting a famous boxer, but as proof that grief didn't make him invisible. That even in a crowded city, someone could still see him. He returned to the park weeks later, sat on the same bench, and didn't cry that time. He just sat, remembered, breathed, and felt a little less alone. People often talk about strength like it's something loud, something forceful, something that dominates a room. But real strength, the kind that lasts, usually shows up quietly. It listens. It stays. It doesn't rush you through your pain or tell you to toughen up. It just reminds you that you matter. Mike Tyson had spent much of his life being seen as the opposite of gentle, a force, a threat, a storm. But that afternoon, none of that mattered. What mattered was a bench, a conversation, and a decision to stop. No punches were thrown. No voices were raised. And yet something meaningful happened. Something that didn't need witnesses to be real. If you take anything from this story, let it be this: you don't have to fix someone to help them. You don't need the right words. You don't need to be famous or powerful. Sometimes all it takes is sitting down when you could have kept walking. So the next time you see someone struggling, someone crying, someone trying not to be noticed, remember this moment. Remember that stopping can matter more than you think. And maybe, without realizing it, you'll change someone's day or their life. If this story resonated with you, let us know in the comments. We read every one. And if you want more stories like this, stories about strength, humanity, and the quiet moments that define us, make sure to like this video and subscribe. We'll be here, and we hope you'll come back.